Chapter 1. The last day of war. Sky above the military base was covered with heavy grey clouds. A cold wind swept across the runway, carrying dust and the distant sound of aircraft engines. Jake Wilson stood beside a transport plane and silently watched the people around him. Some were laughing, some were calling their families, others were already making plans for their first peaceful morning back home. But Jake said nothing. After 2 years overseas, home felt almost unreal, like a place that belonged to another life, a life he barely remembered. Over the years, he had seen too much. To many explosions, to many sleepless nights, to many friends who never made it home. At 24 years old, he sometimes felt twice his age. The war had changed him, not only his body, his soul. The young man who had left Texas 2 years earlier was gone. In his place stood someone harder, stronger, and somehow more broken. A voice echoed across the base: "All personnel, prepare for boarding." The announcement snapped him back to reality. Around him, soldiers began gathering their bags and moving toward the aircraft. The mission was over. They were finally going home. Jake adjusted the strap on his backpack and took one last look at the base. The concrete buildings. The WATCHTO in WERS. The endless desert beyond the fences. For a long moment, he simply stood there. Then a thought crossed his mind. It's over. At least that's what he believed. He had no idea that the hardest battle of his life hadn't even begun. 12 hours later, the aircraft touched down in Austin, Texas. The moment the doors opened, warm air rushed inside. The scent of summer. The smell of home. For the first time in years, Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Relief. As he walked through the terminal, people rushed past him carrying suitcases and flowers. Children ran toward returning parents. Couples embraced. Families cried tears of joy. And then he saw her, his mother, standing among the crowd. Waiting. The moment their eyes met, neither of them moved. For a second, it felt as if time stopped. Then she began walking toward him. Faster. And faster. Until she finally wrapped her arms around him. Jake hugged her tightly. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Some emotions are too big for words. His mother was crying. Jake felt tears forming in his own eyes. But for the first time in years, they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of gratitude. He was alive. And he was finally home. That evening, Jake sat alone on the front porch of his childhood home. The Texas sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. The neighborhood was quiet. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. A warm breeze moved through the trees. For the first time in a very long time, there were no gunshots. No alarms. No fear. Only silence and peace. He held a cup of coffee in his hands and stared at the horizon. Life felt strange. For 2 years, every day had been planned. Every decision had been made for survival. Now, there were no orders. No missions. No enemies. Just an uncertain future. His mother stepped outside and sat beside him. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Then she smiled. "What are you going to do now?" Jake laughed quietly. Honestly, I have no idea." His mother smiled again. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing." Jake looked toward the fading sunset. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was his chance to start over. To build something new. To finally live the life he had put on hold. At that moment, he couldn't possibly know how quickly everything was about to change, because only a few days later, a simple walk through downtown Austin would lead him to a small bookstore. A bookstore he almost didn't enter. A bookstore that looked completely ordinary from the outside. But inside it stood a young woman who would change his life forever. And neither of them had any idea that fate was already bringing their stories together. Chapter 2. The Girl Between 1,000 Books. 3 days after returning home, Jake decided he needed to get out of the house. Not because he was bored, not because he had somewhere to be, but because sitting still felt strange. For 2 years, Every minute of his life had been scheduled. Wake up, train, patrol, mission, sleep, repeat. Now he suddenly had freedom, and he didn't quite know what to do with it. That afternoon, Austin was alive with energy. The streets were crowded. Music drifted from CAFE acutes. People filled the sidewalks, laughing and talking as if the world had never known pain. Jake walked aimlessly through downtown. For the first time in years, nobody expected anything from him. No orders, no responsibilities, no danger. Just another ordinary day. And somehow, that felt unfamiliar. As he turned a corner, a small bookstore caught his attention. The sign above the entrance looked old. The windows were filled with books stacked in every direction. It wasn't the kind of place most people would notice, but something about it made him stop. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was fate. Without thinking much about it, he pushed open the door. A small bell rang overhead. The scent of old books instantly filled the air. For a moment, Jake simply stood there. The store felt peaceful, almost magical. Rows of books stretched from floor to ceiling. Soft music played somewhere in the background, and for the first time since returning home, his mind felt quiet. Then he heard a voice. Careful. Jake looked up. A young woman stood on a small ladder, reaching for a book on the highest shelf. At that exact moment, another book slipped loose. It fell directly toward him. Instinct took over. His hand shot up. The book landed safely in his palm. The woman stared at him. Then burst out laughing. Nice catch. Jake looked at the cover. Military history. She climbed down from the ladder. Of course you caught that one. Jake raised an eyebrow. What does that mean? She pointed at his posture. The haircut, the boots, the way you scanned the room when you walked in. Jake laughed. You noticed all that? I work in a bookstore. She smiled. I notice everything. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then she extended her hand. I'm Emma. Jake shook it. Jake. Her hand felt warm. Soft. Normal. And strangely enough, that simple handshake affected him more than he expected. Because after years of conflict and chaos, normal felt extraordinary. Emma walked toward the front counter. So, Jake. Yeah. Are you actually looking for a book? Honestly, I wasn't planning on it. She laughed. Then why did you come in? Jake looked around. Good question. Emma leaned against the counter. You know, most people come here because they're searching for something. What kind of something? A story. Jake smiled. And what if they don't know what story they're looking for? Emma pointed toward the shelves. Then maybe the story finds them. For some reason, those words stayed with him. Maybe because he wasn't looking for a story. Not anymore. Life had already given him enough stories. Most of them painful. Most of them difficult. But as he stood there talking to Emma, something felt different. Lighter. Easier. For nearly an hour, they talked about books. Movies. Travel. Childhood memories. And somehow, the conversation became awkward. It flowed naturally. As if they had known each other far longer than 60 minutes. Eventually, Jake glanced at his watch. I should probably go. Emma nodded. Probably. Neither moved. Both smiled. Then Jake finally turned toward the door. Just before leaving, he stopped, looked back, and asked, Can I ask you something? Emma crossed her arms. Depends. Are you always this easy to talk to? A smile appeared on her face. Only on Tuesdays. Jake laughed. It's Thursday. I know. For a moment, he simply looked at her. Then smiled. I'll see you around. Emma. She nodded. I hope so. Jake walked outside. The warm Texas sunlight hit his face. Cars moved through the streets. People hurried past. Everything looked exactly the same. But somehow, it didn't feel the same. Because for the first time in a very long while, he found himself smiling for no reason. As he continued walking, one thought kept returning to him. He should have asked for her number. He should have stayed longer. He should have said something. Anything. Then he laughed at himself. 24. years old. Former Marine. And somehow nervous because of a girl in a bookstore. That night, as he lay in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about her. Her laugh. Her eyes. The way she seemed to see right through him. And without realizing it, he began looking forward to tomorrow. Because deep down, he already knew one thing. He wasn't finished with that bookstore. And he definitely wasn't finished with Emma. What Jake didn't know was that this simple meeting was about to become the most important chapter of his entire life. Chapter 3. Falling in love after war. Next morning, Jake woke up earlier than usual. For a few moments, he stared at the ceiling, trying to understand why he felt different. Then he remembered. A smile appeared on his face before he could stop it. It had been a long time since someone occupied his thoughts this way. Years, actually. During the war, there was never time for feelings. Survival came first. Everything else came later. But now, for the first time in years, he found himself looking forward to something. Or rather. Someone. That afternoon, he found himself standing in front of the bookstore again. He told himself it was a coincidence, that he was simply walking through the area, that he happened to be nearby. Even he didn't believe that. The small bell above the door rang as he stepped inside. Emma looked up from behind the counter. The moment she saw him, a smile appeared. A military history book again. Jake laughed. No. Then what brings you here today? He thought for a moment. Then answered honestly. You. Emma looked away, pretending to organize a stack of books, but he noticed the smile she couldn't hide. That's a dangerous answer. Why? Because now I know. Jake grinned. Maybe I wanted you to know. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The atmosphere between them felt different. Warmer. Closer. Like something invisible was slowly pulling them together. From that day on, visiting the bookstore became part of Jake's routine. Some days they talked for 10 minutes. Other days for hours. He learned that Emma loved photography, that she dreamed of seeing Italy one day, that she collected old postcards from places she'd never visited. She learned that Jake drank too much coffee, that he hated waking up early despite military discipline, and that sometimes he still woke up from nightmares. They talked about everything. And somehow, every conversation felt too short. A few weeks later, Jake finally gathered enough courage. As Emma was locking the bookstore door one evening, he cleared his throat. Can I ask you something? Emma smiled. You ask me things every day. This one's different. She tilted her head. Okay. Double quotes. Jake took a deep breath. Would you like to have dinner with me? For the first time since they'd met, Emma looked nervous. A small smile crossed her face. I was beginning to think you'd never ask. Jake laughed. So that's a yes. That's definitely a yes. Their first date lasted almost 6 hours. Neither of them planned it. Neither wanted it to end. They started at a small restaurant downtown. Then walked through the city. Then bought coffee. Then continued walking. The conversation never stopped. Not once. The city lights reflected off the streets as evening settled over Austin. Music drifted from nearby bars. Cars passed slowly. The night felt alive. At one point, they reached a bridge overlooking the river. The water shimmered beneath them. For a while, they simply stood there together, watching the city lights dance across the surface. Emma leaned against the railing. You know something? What? You don't seem like the person I expected. Jake smiled. Is that a good thing? I think so. What did you expect? Emma thought for a second. A serious Marine who barely talks. Jake laughed. And what did you get? She looked directly into his eyes. A good man, who's trying very hard not to let the world see his scars. The words hit him harder than he expected, because they were true. And somehow she had seen it, without him ever saying it. As the night grew colder, they continued walking. Side by side. Talking about the future. Dreams. Places they wanted to visit. The kind of life they hoped to build. For the first time in years, Jake spoke about the future without fear. without hesitation, because somehow, when Emma was around, the future no longer seemed frightening. It seemed exciting. Eventually, they reached her car. The night was coming to an end. Neither wanted to say goodbye. Neither knew how. Emma smiled softly. Thank you. For what? For tonight. Jake looked at her. No. He shook his head. Thank you. For a moment, neither moved. The world around them seemed to disappear. The noise. The traffic. The city. Everything faded into the background. There was only the two of them. Emma took a small step closer. Jake's heart pounded. The same way it used to before a mission. Except this felt completely different. This wasn't fear. This was hope. And then it happened. Their first kiss. Gentle. Awkward. Perfect. The kind of moment people remember for the rest of their lives. When they finally pulled apart, neither could stop smiling. Emma laughed quietly. That took long enough. Jake shook his head. I was trying to be respectful. You were being terrified. He laughed. Maybe a little. Maybe. Okay. A lot. They both laughed. And in that moment, something changed. Not just between them. Inside him. For the first time since returning from war. For the first time in years. Jake felt truly happy. Not because the past was gone. Not because life was perfect. But because someone had entered his life and reminded him that happiness was still possible. As he drove home that night, one thought stayed in his mind. Maybe some people don't enter our lives by accident. Maybe fate waits patiently and then introduces us to the right person at exactly the right time. What Jake didn't know was that the happiest days of his life were only beginning. And neither of them could imagine how quickly everything would change. Chapter 4. Building a future together. The months that followed became the happiest chapter of Jake's life. Not because life suddenly became perfect. Not because all his problems disappeared. But because, for the first time in years, he wasn't facing life alone. Emma was there. Every morning. Every evening. Every ordinary moment that somehow became extraordinary, simply because she was part of it. Sometimes they spent entire weekends together, driving through small Texas towns, stopping at roadside diners. Taking photographs of places nobody else seemed to notice. Emma carried her camera everywhere. She photographed old buildings, sunsets, coffee cups, stray cats, anything she found beautiful. One afternoon, Jake caught her taking a picture of him. What was that for? He asked. Emma lowered the camera. I like collecting memories. Jake laughed. You could have warned me. Then it wouldn't be natural. She checked the photo. A smile appeared. Perfect. Jake shook his head. I look terrible. Emma looked at him. No. Her voice softened. You look happy. For a moment, he didn't answer, because she was right. He was. As summer turned into autumn, their relationship grew stronger. The bookstore became their place. The river became their place. Even simple walks felt special. Sometimes they would sit on a bench for hours, talking about nothing important. And somehow, those became the moments Jake treasured most. One evening, they found themselves watching the sunset near a small lake outside Austin. The water reflected shades of orange and gold. The world felt calm. Peaceful. Emma rested her head on his shoulder. What do you think your future looks like? She asked. Jake smiled. A year ago. Emma nodded. A year ago. I couldn't imagine one. She lifted her head. What about now? Jake looked at the lake. Then at her. And for the first time, he answered honestly. Now I can. Emma smiled. And Jake took a deep breath. I see a house. A house. Yeah. She laughed. Very specific. I'm serious. Okay. Jake pointed toward the water. Somewhere like this. Emma followed his gaze. A lake. A lake. She smiled. Go on. Jake continued. A porch. A dog. Emma laughed. A dog. Definitely a dog. What kind? The biggest one we can find. Emma was laughing now. And what else? Jake looked at her. The answer came naturally. You, for a moment. She froze. Then a small smile appeared. The kind of smile that said everything words COULD in single quotes D. And in that moment, both of them imagined the same. Future. A future together. The following year passed. Quickly. Faster than either of them expected. Their friends noticed it. Their families noticed it. Even strangers noticed it. The way they looked at each other. The way they smiled. The way they seemed completely at home together. One evening, Jake's mother pulled him aside. "I've never seen you like this." Jake smiled. "Like what?" "Happy." He looked across the room. Emma was laughing with his family. Completely comfortable. Completely herself. And somehow, it felt like she had always belonged there. His mother followed his gaze, then smiled. "Don't lose her." Jake looked at Emma. And quietly replied, "I don't plan to." Several months later, Jake made a decision. One he had been thinking about for a long time. He bought a ring, not an extravagant one. Not the most expensive one, just the one that immediately reminded him of her. Simple. Elegant. Beautiful. Like Emma. For 3 weeks, he carried it everywhere. Waiting for the perfect moment. Every day he planned it. Every day he changed his mind. Every day he became more nervous. Until finally, one autumn evening, he knew. They returned to the lake. The same lake where they had once talked about their future. The air was cool. The sky glowed with the colors of sunset. Emma stood near the water taking photographs. Completely unaware of what was about to happen, Jake felt his heart racing, his hands shaking. He had faced enemy fire. He had survived war, yet somehow this felt more terrifying. Emma turned around, immediately noticing something strange. "What?" Jake laughed nervously. "What do you mean? You're acting weird." "I know. You look terrified." "I know." Emma slowly lowered her camera. Jake took a step forward. Then another. Then he reached into his pocket. The moment she saw the small box, her eyes widened. Neither spoke for several seconds. The world seemed to stand still. Jake swallowed hard, then finally spoke. "Emma." His voice shook. She covered her mouth. Tears instantly filled her eyes. Jake smiled. "I spent years believing that life had already shown me everything it had to offer." He took another breath. "But then I met you." Emma was crying now. Jake continued. "You made me believe in happiness again." His voice grew quieter. "You made me believe in the future." He slowly lowered himself onto one knee. "And I don't want a future without you in it." Emma's tears streamed down her cheeks. Jake opened the box. The ring sparkled in the fading sunlight. "Emma Parker. Double quotes." His voice trembled. "Will you marry me?" For a second she couldn't speak. Then she nodded. Once. Twice. Again. Finally finding her voice. "Yes." She laughed through tears. "Yes." Jake stood up. Emma threw her arms around him. And for a moment, the entire world disappeared. There was only the two of them, the lake, the sunset. And the promise of forever. That night they celebrated. They talked about wedding plans. About the future. About the house by the lake. About children. About growing old together. About everything they still had ahead of them. Neither of them knew it, but fate was already writing a different chapter, a chapter neither could have imagined. Because just 3 weeks later. On a rainy night. A single truck would change everything, and the life they had carefully built together would be shattered in a matter of seconds. Chapter 5. The night everything changed. There are moments in life that divide everything into two parts. Before. And after. For Jake and Emma. That moment arrived on a cold November night. A night that began like any other and ended with their entire world falling apart. The rain started shortly after sunset. At first, it was only a light drizzle. Tiny drops tapping softly against the windshield. Jake and Emma were driving home after dinner with friends. The engagement was all anyone wanted to talk about. Wedding ideas, venues, dates, guest lists, future plans. 4 hours they had listened to jokes about marriage and endless advice from people who thought they knew everything. Now, finally alone, they laughed about it. Emma sat in the passenger seat scrolling through photographs she had taken that evening. Jake glanced over briefly. Any good ones? Emma smiled. Maybe. I'm the artist here. Jake laughed. Of course, outside. The rain became heavier. The windshield wipers moved faster. The highway stretched endlessly ahead of them. Most drivers had already slowed down. The road shimmered beneath the lights. Emma looked out the window. You know something? What? I still can't believe we're getting married. Jake smiled. Me neither. Emma looked at the engagement ring, the same ring she had admired 100 times already, and probably would admire 1,000 more. I've never been this happy. Jake glanced toward her. For a brief second, just a second, long enough to smile, long enough to say, me too. Then everything happened at once. Headlights, a horn, a scream, and then impact. A deafening explosion of metal. Glass shattered. The world spun. Everything became noise. Chaos. Darkness. And then nothing. Jake woke up to pain. The kind of pain that immediately told him something was terribly wrong. His ears rang. His vision blurred. For several seconds, he couldn't understand where he was. Then reality returned. The car, the highway. The crash. Emma. His heart stopped. Emma. His voice cracked. No answer. Emma. Still nothing. Panic exploded inside him. He tried to move. Agony shot through his body, but he didn't care. He turned toward the passenger seat. The sight nearly broke him. Emma wasn't moving. Blood covered part of her face. The side of the vehicle was completely destroyed. Rain poured through broken windows. Somewhere in the distance, people were shouting. Sirens approached. Jake kept calling her name. Again. And again. And again. But she never answered. The next time he opened his eyes, he was in a hospital. Bright lights, white walls. Machines. The smell of antiseptic. For a moment, he thought it had all been a nightmare. Then he saw the bandages, the IV line, the bruises covering his arms, and he remembered. Emma. Immediately, he tried sitting up. A sharp pain shot through his ribs. A nurse rushed into the room. Sir, you need to stay down. Where's Emma? The nurse hesitated. Jake's stomach dropped. Where is she? The silence felt unbearable. Finally, the nurse spoke. She's alive. Jake exhaled. For a second, relief flooded through him. Then he noticed the expression on her face, and the relief disappeared. What happened? The nurse looked away. She's in intensive care. Jake felt cold. What does that mean? The answer came slowly. Carefully. Like she was afraid to say the words. She's in a coma. The room became silent. Jake stared at her. Certain he had misunderstood. No. The nurse lowered her eyes. No. Jake shook his head. No. You don't understand. His voice began to break. We were talking. 10 seconds before the crash. We were fine. The nurse said nothing, because there was nothing she could say. 3 hours later, Jake stood outside Emma's hospital room. His ribs hurt. His shoulder hurt. Every step hurt. But none of it mattered. Nothing mattered except her. Through the glass, he could see the machines. The monitors. The tubes. The wires. And Emma. Motionless. The strongest person he knew. Lying completely still. He stepped inside. Slowly. As if afraid the room collapse around him. For several moments, he simply stood there, unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to accept what he was seeing. Then he finally reached her bedside and took her hand. It felt warm. Still alive. Still here. But somehow impossibly far away. Jake lowered his head. And for the first time since the war, he cried. Not quietly. Not politely. He broke. Every fear, every nightmare, every painful memory. Every loss. It all came rushing back. Because for the second time in his life, he felt completely helpless. And this time, the person he loved was slipping away. The doctors operated twice, then a third time. Every day brought new uncertainty. Every conversation seemed worse than the one before. The medical bills began arriving. The numbers were impossible. Tens of thousands. Then hundreds of thousands. Insurance refused to cover much of the treatment. Lawyers became involved. Paperwork piled up. And still Emma remained unconscious. Weeks passed. Jake rarely left the hospital. He slept in waiting rooms, lived on vending machine coffee, ignored his own injuries. Every morning began the same way. Hope. Every night ended the same way. Disappointment. Still no change. Still no response. Still no Emma. One evening, nearly 2 months after the accident, a doctor asked him to step into a private office. Jake immediately knew something was wrong. Doctors only used that tone when they had bad news. The doctor folded his hands and spoke carefully. "Mr. Wilson." Jake's heart pounded. "We need to discuss long-term treatment." "What does that mean?" The doctor sighed. "It means Emma will need specialized care." "How much?" The doctor opened a folder. Jake stared at the estimate. His blood ran cold. The amount was staggering. Far beyond anything he could afford. Far beyond anything his family could help with. For several moments he couldn't speak. The doctor finally asked, "Do you have any options?" Jake sat there in silence. Then one possibility entered his mind. A possibility he had sworn never to consider again. The military, a new deployment, a dangerous contract overseas. The pay was enormous. The risks were even greater. The doctor waited. Jake stared at the papers. Then slowly nodded. "I'll find a way." Because he had already made his decision. No matter the course. No matter the danger. No matter what happened to him. He would save Emma. Even if it meant returning to the one place he thought he had left behind forever. War. The following night, Jake sat beside Emma's bed. The deployment papers were already signed. The flight was in 3 days. He held her hand gently. And stared at the woman he loved. For a long time, he said nothing. Then finally whispered, "Emma." His voice trembled. "I'm going away for a little while." The machines continued their steady rhythm. No response. No movement. Only silence. Jake squeezed her hand. Tears filled his eyes. "But I promise you something." His voice cracked. "I will come back." He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. "Just don't leave before I get home." Outside the hospital window, rain began to fall once again. And somewhere deep inside, Jake felt a fear he had never known before. Because for the first time in his life, love had become a battlefield, and he was about to go to war all over again. Chapter 6. A War for Lover. 3 days later, Jake stood on the runway once again. The sound of aircraft engines filled the air. Soldiers moved around him carrying gear and equipment. The scene looked painfully familiar, almost identical to the day he had come home. Only this time, everything felt different. The last time he had left for war, he was serving his country. This time, he was fighting for one person. Emma. The woman lying unconscious thousands of miles away. The woman he refused to lose. As the transport plane lifted into the sky, Jake stared through the small window. Below him, America slowly disappeared beneath the clouds, and somewhere beyond those clouds was Emma, still sleeping, still waiting, though neither of them knew it. The deployment was worse than anything he had experienced before. The missions were dangerous, the terrain unforgiving. Every day carried risk. Every night carried uncertainty. Jake volunteered for every assignment he could. The more dangerous the mission, the higher the pay. His fellow soldiers thought he was reckless. Some believed he was trying to prove something. Others assumed he was running from something. Only Jake knew the truth. He wasn't running. He was racing against time. Every dollar he earned went directly toward Emma's treatment. Every mission brought him one step closer to helping her. And every night, before trying to sleep, he pulled out the same photograph. Emma smiling beside the lake. The day he proposed. The happiest day of his life. The edges of the photograph had already begun to wear down, but he carried it everywhere, a reminder of what he was fighting for. Weeks passed, then months. The war became routine. The danger became routine. Even fear became routine. But one thing never changed. Every morning Jake woke up wondering whether Emma had opened her eyes. And every night he fell asleep wondering the same thing. The uncertainty was slowly destroying him. Because not knowing can be worse than bad news. At least bad news gives you an answer. Hope can become its own kind of torture. Back in Texas, something extraordinary happened. A nurse was performing a routine examination. Nothing unusual, nothing unexpected, just another ordinary morning. Then she noticed movement. Tiny movement. Almost impossible to see. At first, she thought she imagined it. Then she saw it again. Emma's finger moved. The nurse immediately called for a doctor. Within minutes the room filled with medical staff. Machines beeped. Voices echoed. Tests were performed. And then, after nearly 3 months, Emma opened her eyes. The room was blurry. The lights were bright. The sounds unfamiliar. She struggled to understand where she was. What had happened? Why her body felt so weak? Then memories slowly returned. The accident. The rain. Jake. Immediately she tried to speak. The words barely escaped her lips. Jake. The nurse smiled. He's not here right now. Emma frowned. What do you mean? The nurse hesitated. Then explained everything. The accident. The surgeries. The coma. The medical bills. And finally. The deployment. Emma stared in disbelief. He left. The nurse nodded. Double quotes. He wanted to save your life. For a long moment, Emma simply cried. Because she finally understood what Jake had sacrificed. Everything. Again. For her. Thousands of miles away. Jake knew nothing. Communication was limited. Messages were delayed. Weeks often passed before news arrived. And in a cruel twist of fate, the message about Emma waking up never reached him. At least not immediately. One mission became another. Then another. The days blended together. Until one evening, everything changed. Jake's unit was returning from an operation. The convoy moved slowly through rough terrain. The sun was setting. The world seemed calm. To calm. Then the explosion came. A deafening blast beneath the lead vehicle. The shock wave threw dirt and debris into the air. Gunfire erupted. Chaos followed. Soldiers scrambled for cover. Orders echoed through radios. Jake reacted instantly. Training took over. The firefight lasted nearly 20 minutes, long enough to feel like an eternity. When it finally ended, several soldiers were wounded. One never got up. Jake sat on the ground afterward, breathing heavily, covered in dust, covered in sweat, and suddenly, a terrifying thought entered his mind. What if I die here? The thought wouldn't leave. 4 years. He had accepted the possibility of death. It came with the uniform. But now things were different. Now, there was someone waiting for him. Someone he needed to get back to. Someone worth surviving for. That realization changed everything. For the first time, Jake wasn't fighting because he was a soldier. He was fighting because he wanted a future with Emma. Several weeks later, his contract finally ended. The money was enough. More than enough. The treatment could continue. The debts could be paid. The mission was complete. As Jake boarded the plane home, he felt something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. Real hope. The kind that makes your chest feel lighter. The kind that makes impossible things seem possible. For nearly 10 hours he sat staring out the window. Thinking about Emma. Thinking about their future. Thinking about the moment he would finally see her again. He imagined walking into the hospital room. Taking her hand, telling her everything. And maybe, just maybe, seeing her wake up. The possibility seemed impossible, but he held on to it anyway, because hope was all he had left. The plane landed in Austin just after sunrise. Jake barely slept, barely ate, barely spoke. The moment he stepped off the aircraft, he headed straight for the hospital. Not home. Not his mother's house. Not anywhere else. Only one destination mattered. The drive felt endless. Every red light felt personal. Every minute felt like an hour. Finally, he arrived. The hospital looked exactly the same. The same entrance, the same hallways, the same smell. His heart pounded harder with every step. He hurried toward Emma's room. His hands shook. His breathing quickened. Then he reached the door. Slowly, he pushed it open. And froze. Because Emma wasn't lying unconscious in the bed anymore. She was sitting upright, reading a book. Alive. Awake. Smiling. For a moment neither moved. Neither spoke, neither seemed capable of believing what they were seeing. Then Emma stood up. The book slipped from her hands. Tears filled her eyes. Jake, his knees nearly gave out. Emma. And in the next second, they were running toward each other. The months of fear, the months of pain, the months of uncertainty, all disappeared. They held each other tightly, as if letting go would somehow make it all disappear. Both were crying. Both were laughing. Neither cared who saw, because against every prediction, against every statistic, against every nightmare, they had found each other again. And for the first time since the accident, it felt like the story might finally have a happy ending. Neither of them knew that fate had one final chapter left to write. Chapter 7. The miracle and the diagnosis. For a while, life felt beautiful again. Not perfect. Not easy, but beautiful. After months of fear, uncertainty, and separation, Jake and Emma finally had each other back, and neither of them intended to waste a single moment. Emma's recovery wasn't easy. The accident had left scars, some visible, some hidden. She had to learn how to trust her body again. Some days were good, some days were frustrating, but Jake was there through all of it. Every hospital appointment, every therapy session. Every difficult day, every small victory. When Emma managed to walk without assistance for the first time, Jake was there. When she finally returned to the bookstore, Jake was there. When she smiled for the first time without forcing it, Jake was there. And every night, before falling asleep, he silently thanked God for giving her another chance, a second chance. Their second chance. Months passed. Slowly, life began returning to normal. Or at least as normal as it could be. The wedding plans resumed. Friends joked that they had already survived enough drama for an entire lifetime. Emma would laugh. Jake would agree. And secretly, both believed the worst was finally behind them. They deserved peace, didn't they? One evening, Emma found an old notebook. The notebook contained a list they had created long before the accident. A list of dreams, places they wanted to visit, experiences they wanted to share. Crazy ideas, small adventures, big adventures. At the top of the page, Emma had written, "Before we get old." Jake laughed when he saw it. "We're not old." Emma pointed at him. "We're getting there. 25 isn't old. It is when you're boring." Jake pretended to be offended. "I'm not boring." Emma raised an eyebrow. "You organized your coffee mugs by size. That's called responsibility." "No," she laughed. "That's called being 35 in a 25-year-old body." Their laughter filled the room. For a moment, life felt exactly the way it used to. Over the following months, they started crossing items off the list. Road trips. Skydiving. Watching the sunrise from a mountain. Swimming in the ocean at midnight. Taking ridiculous photos in tourist attractions. Living. Really living. And for the first time since the accident, Emma looked truly happy. So did Jake, because every smile felt like a miracle. Every day felt like borrowed time. Every moment felt precious. Then the headaches began. At first, nobody worried. The doctors assumed it was stress. Recovery. Fatigue. Nothing unusual. Emma ignored it. Jake worried. As always. A few weeks later, the headaches became stronger. Then came dizziness. Then exhaustion. Then pain. The kind of pain that couldn't be ignored. Doctors ordered tests. Then more tests. Then additional scans. Each appointment created more questions than answers. And suddenly, the fear returned. The same fear they thought they had left behind. One rainy afternoon, they sat together in a hospital office. The atmosphere felt wrong. Too quiet, too serious. Jake immediately recognized it. He had seen that expression on doctors' faces before. The careful tone, the measured words, the silence before bad news. The doctor opened a folder, took a breath. And spoke. "We found something." Emma squeezed Jake's hand. Jake squeezed hers back. The doctor continued. "It's aggressive. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The room felt smaller. Colder. The doctor lowered his eyes. And finally said the words, cancer. The world stopped. Jake stared at him, certain he had misunderstood. Emma sat frozen. Silent. The doctor continued explaining medical terms, treatment, options. Statistics. Probabilities. But neither of them heard most of it. One word drowned out everything else. Cancer. Finally Jake managed to ask, what stage? The doctor looked at them. His silence answered before his words did. Stage 4. Emma closed her eyes. Jake felt his heart shatter. No. Not again. Anything but this. The doctor continued speaking, but his voice sounded distant, like it was coming from another room. Another world. Then came the final sentence, the one that destroyed what little hope remained. It cannot be cured. The drive home was silent. The rain tapped softly against the windshield. Neither spoke, neither cried. The pain was too large for tears. Finally Emma looked out the window. Remember when I woke up? Jake nodded. You told me we'd beaten the impossible. His voice trembled. We did. Emma smiled sadly. No. She looked down. We only borrowed time. Jake immediately shook his head. Don't. Emma looked at him. Jake. No. His voice cracked. We're not giving up. She reached for his hand. I'm not giving up. Then, don't talk like that. Emma smiled gently. The kind of smile that somehow made everything hurt more. Over the following weeks, they searched everywhere. Specialists. Experimental treatments. Research hospitals. Clinical trials. Experts. Across the country. Jake spent every free moment searching for answers. Every article. Every study. Every possibility. Anything. Everything. But the answers never changed. The diagnosis remained the same. And deep down, both of them knew the truth. Time was running out. One evening, Emma sat on the porch watching the sunset. Jake joined her. For several minutes, neither spoke. Then Emma finally broke the silence. If you could relive one day of your life. Double quotes. Jake looked at her. What kind of question is that? Just answer. He smiled. I'd go back to the bookstore. Emma laughed softly. The bookstore. The day I met you. Her eyes filled with tears. Jake continued. Because if I lived my entire life 1,000 times. He looked directly at her. I'd choose you every single time. Emma couldn't stop crying. Neither could Jake. Because for the first time. Both of them understood something terrifying. The story they thought would last forever was approaching its final chapter, and neither was ready to say goodbye. Chapter 8. The last letter. Following months became the most precious months of their lives, not because they were easy, not because they were free from pain, but because every day mattered. Every sunrise. Every conversation, every smile, every second. When you know time is limited, ordinary moments become extraordinary. And Jake and Emma understood that better than anyone. One morning, Emma pulled out the old notebook again, the notebook with their dreams, the list they had started years earlier. She placed it on the kitchen table, opened it, and smiled. Jake immediately knew what she was thinking. We're finishing it. Emma nodded. We're finishing all of it. And so they did. They traveled whenever her health allowed it. They stood on beaches and watched the ocean. They drove through mountains. They visited small towns they had always wanted to see. They watched sunsets. Sunrises. Storms. Everything. Because suddenly every experience felt important. Every memory felt irreplaceable. Sometimes Emma would take photographs. Sometimes she would simply sit quietly and watch the world. As if she was trying to remember every detail, every color, every sound, every feeling. One evening they sat beside the Pacific Ocean. The waves rolled gently toward the shore. The sky glowed orange and gold. The air smelled of salt and summer. Emma leaned against Jake's shoulder. Neither spoke for a while. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It never was. After everything they had survived together, words weren't always necessary. Finally Emma spoke. "Do you know what I regret?" Jake immediately shook his head. "No," she smiled. "You don't even know what I'm going to say." "I don't care." Emma laughed softly. Jake looked at her. "You don't get to have regrets." Emma smiled. "Oh really? Really?" She squeezed his hand. "You're impossible." "No." Jake looked at the ocean. "I'm in love." A few minutes passed. Then Emma became serious. The kind of serious that immediately made Jake nervous. "Jake." He turned toward her. "What?" She reached into her bag, pulled out a small white envelope, and handed it to him. Jake frowned. "What's this?" Emma smiled. "A promise." He looked confused. "What kind of promise?" Her eyes became glassy. "The kind you won't like." Immediately his stomach tightened. "No." Emma nodded. "Take it." Jake refused. "No, Jake, no." His voice cracked. "I don't want it." Emma looked away. Tears filled her eyes. "I know." The envelope remained between them. A silent conversation neither wanted to have. Finally, after several seconds, Jake accepted it. Slowly, reluctantly, as if touching it somehow made everything more real. "What is it?" Emma took a deep breath. "A letter." Jake closed his eyes, immediately understanding. "Emma." She squeezed his hand. "Promise me." He looked down. Said nothing. "Promise me you'll read it." Still silence. "Promise me." Finally, Jake nodded. Once. Slowly. Painfully. And Emma smiled. Even though tears were running down her face, the disease progressed faster than anyone expected. Weeks became days. Days became moments. The woman who once carried a camera everywhere now struggled to walk. The woman who dreamed of seeing the entire world became too weak to leave the house. And still, she smiled. Still she laughed. Still she found ways to make everyone around her feel stronger, even when she was the one who needed strength. One night, Jake woke up and found Emma sitting by the window. Moonlight illuminated the room. She looked peaceful, almost fragile. Jake walked over and sat beside her. "What are you doing?" Emma smiled. "Watching the stars." They sat together quietly. Then Emma pointed upward. "Do you think there's something after this?" Jake followed her gaze. The stars stretched endlessly across the sky. "I don't know." Emma nodded. Neither did she. After a moment, she leaned her head against his shoulder. "If there is," her voice was barely above a whisper, "I'll wait for you." Jake felt tears forming instantly. He wrapped his arm around her. And held her tighter. As if love alone could stop time. 3 days later, Emma's condition worsened. The doctors did everything they could, but everyone knew the end was approaching. Family gathered, friends visited. The house became filled with people, yet somehow, it had never felt emptier. That evening, Emma asked to be alone with Jake. Everyone quietly left the room. The door closed. And suddenly it was just the two of them, like it had always been. Jake sat beside her bed, holding her hand, the same hand he had held on their first date, the same hand he had held through hospitals. Through recovery, through life. Emma smiled weakly. "You know." Jake lowered his head. "What?" "You saved me." Tears immediately filled his eyes. "No," she nodded. "You did." Her voice grew softer. "You gave me more life than I ever thought I'd have." Jake couldn't speak. Emma looked at him. And smiled, the same smile he had fallen in love with years ago. "I was lucky." Jake shook his head. "No." His voice broke. "I was." Neither could stop crying, because there were no more words left, only love and goodbye. That night, while holding Jake's hand, Emma quietly slipped away. Peacefully. Without fear, without pain, just silence. The kind of silence that changes a person forever. The funeral came and went. Friends shared memories. Family shared stories. People spoke about how kind she was, how brave she was, how much she had loved life. Jake heard every word, yet somehow remembered almost none of them, because part of him still expected his phone to ring, still expected her voice, still expected one more day. One more conversation. One more chance. But life doesn't always give us one more chance. Weeks later, Jake finally opened the envelope. The envelope he had carried everywhere. The one he had been too afraid to read. His hands trembled as he unfolded the letter. Inside, Emma's handwriting greeted him. The moment he saw it, tears filled his eyes. The letter began, "If you're reading this, then I'm probably somewhere complaining that heaven doesn't have enough bookstores." Jake laughed through tears. That sounded exactly like her. He continued reading. "Thank you for loving me. Thank you for staying. Thank you for every sunrise, every road trip, every stupid joke, every photograph, every memory. You gave me a beautiful life, Jake. More beautiful than I ever imagined. But now I need one thing from you. Live. Not survive. Not exist. Live. Travel. Laugh. Help people. Fall in love with life again. And please, don't spend every day missing me. Because if there really is another side, I want to look down and see you smiling, not crying. Promise me that. I love you. For there were Emma. Inside the envelope was something else. A plane ticket. One way to Italy. The destination they had always dreamed of visiting together. 1 year later, Jake stood on a cliff overlooking the Amalfi Coast. The Mediterranean stretched endlessly before him. The sunset painted the horizon gold. The wind moved gently through the air. In his hand was a photograph. Emma. Smiling. Holding her camera. Happy. Alive. For a long time, he stood there. Looking at the ocean, looking at the sky. Thinking about everything they had shared, everything they had lost, everything they had found. Then he smiled, not because the pain was gone. It never would be, but because love had left something behind. Gratitude. Peace. Hope. Jake looked at the photograph one final time, then toward the horizon. And quietly whispered, "Thank you." The wind carried the words away. The sun slowly disappeared beyond the sea, and somewhere deep inside, for the first time in a very long while, he felt whole again. Sometimes the greatest love stories are not the ones that last forever. They're the ones that change us forever. And Emma had done exactly that. The end.